This episode is brought to you by TherapyNotes. You can check them out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. They're the leading electronic health record system for private practices. And they're who I use in my practice and couldn't do without them. So be sure and check them out, therapynotes.com. Hello, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, where we explore the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Well, hello everyone. This is episode number 230 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm glad you've joined me for the podcast. And this is your first time listening in. Glad you found us. And if you're coming back for more, welcome back. And I'm glad you're with me on this journey. I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest, Shaelene Kite. And we had just a wonderful conversation. And she was just a delight to talk to. And really just around how you can really take your passion, particularly for the clinical side of things, and Shaelene's kind of purview is doing DBT, and she really loves doing DBT. And so you're going to get to hear from her in this episode about how she took that passion and just kind of built it into some new directions for herself. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing from Shaelene. And Shaelene also recently came out with a new podcast called Tea Talk with Shaelene. So you'll find links in the show notes and the show summary for that. And I'm just getting started listening to that one. And so I think you're going to enjoy hearing that and just kind of those things that she's been doing. So, but before we get to my conversation with Shaelene, one of the things I've been working on here lately is really trying to discern and figure out what sort of resources are most needed by people, and also particularly what they would like to get more of from me here at the Practice of Therapy. So I've put like a little short survey together for you to go and answer some of those questions, because one of the things that I've really kind of made a commitment to is to really make sure that people are getting the resources that they're looking for and really find helpful in building their practices and just doing the work that they do, not only on the business side of things, but also on the clinical side of things. So anyway, if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/survey, you'll find the new survey I've put together there for you to take. And I promise that it won't take you very long. I purposely kept it very short because, quite honestly, I get, I know you probably do too, get just a lot of people asking for surveys and questionnaires. I know I get a lot of those from insurance companies who we're with. But anyway, that information would just be really incredibly helpful. And also, you can always just shoot me an email at gordon@practiceoftherapy.com and let me know your thoughts and just things that you're looking for. And I'm looking forward to starting to pull together meaningful resources for people within this whole private practice area. I've got some resources out there already, and if you've been listening to the podcast for some time, you'll know about those. But one place that I'd like to point you to is just the free webinars that I've got together so far. And you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/webinars and see the offerings that we have right now. And these are all automated webinars. So you get to pick the time that you want to participate in the webinar and go through that. And the other thing too is I always invite you to go over to the website, practiceoftherapy.com, and just do some poking around and looking at what we've got there. There's just tons of content there now. I was, the other thing too, before I get real quickly here, not to get too far off on a tangent, but quick story is that I was getting the idea, got an idea from my good friend, Dr. David Hall, to do some throwback episodes. So I've gone back in the archives and you're going to get to hear some of my older episodes. And one in particular that I hope to have out here is an interview I did with our late dear friend Roy Huggins. And so I hope to revisit that interview here in the near future. So, but anyway, get in touch with me, practiceoftherapy.com, and also you can email me at gordon@practiceoftherapy.com and take time to fill out that survey for me at practiceoftherapy.com/survey, just to let me know what you're interested in learning more about and how I can be of help to you in your journey. And so, yes, without further ado, before we get to my interview with Shaelene, love for you to hear from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
As your practice grows, the systems and processes you have in place will keep your practice running smoothly. That is why it is important to have an electronic health record system that is specific to mental health providers. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. They are who Gordon uses in his practice. And did I mention that they are one of the top-rated EHRs for mental health private practices? Their support is also second to none. Be sure to check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. Be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so glad for you to get to know Shaelene Kite, who we connected online. And Shaelene, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. And Shailene's doing some really interesting and needed work in that she's doing a lot of training of DBT and then just doing some consulting as well. But as I start with everyone, Shaelene, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Sure. So in, I would say 2008 or 2009, I was fresh out of undergrad and I had gotten a job at a adolescent group home, and they didn't really have any one formal modality. I think a lot of groups homes are just in survival mode when it comes to finding a type of therapy to do. But one of the program coordinators there was really trying to push DBT, and nobody had formal training in DBT. They couldn't afford to send anybody to training, but we were doing the best that we could in terms of trying to teach some of the DBT skills to the teens there, trying to help them understand their behaviors in certain ways that DBT kind of prescribes or allows. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I first got introduced to it. And then from there, I finished grad school, and I remember sitting in a class asking a friend of mine, we were getting ready to graduate. And I said, "Where are you going to work?" And she said, "I'm going to work at the place I interned. It's a women's trauma center." It was a partial hospitalization level of care. And she just kept saying great things about it. It was very women focused, women driven, and they specialize in DBT there. And so I said, "Who can I email?" I tried to finagle my way in there, and I did, luckily. And that was a program that was predominantly DBT driven. And I got my training there. I got a lot of exposure to women who had pretty complex PTSD and borderline personality. Mm-hmm. Through there, I started getting more into yoga for myself personally, kind of noticed a need for those women as well. And so I became a yoga teacher. And then since then, I really just continued to dedicate all of my learning into DBT because I believe in it so much and I can see the results happen. Mm-hmm. As well as bringing together yoga and trauma therapy and trying to find ways to integrate both of them. So I've done a lot of advanced study and training in that realm. And then I think I just kept getting held up by places where I could only go so much further. So when I was working at a partial program, I only saw the clients that I had, and then they would leave, and then they would leave, and they would be really great when they were with us in program, but they couldn't find providers outside who were doing DBT.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would kind of like fall apart and then come back to the program. And so I thought like, okay, I'm going to go do this. And so then I did it, but then I got full. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to open a group practice. And then, you start a group practice and there's only so many therapists and I was just like, I feel like I should spend my time training other people. So I keep thinking about like, what is the best way to maximize my time in a way that'll create a bigger ripple effective impact. And so that's how my latest business venture with Rebelmente kind of came to be. I just found myself in a place where I was consulting with people more and more were asking me for supervision or for training. And so I wanted to formalize that and try and put a way that I could, have my hand in training more therapists and they would go out there and do that work and then it would spread everywhere.
Right. Well, that is great. I know that I think when we can discover kind of thinking outside the box as far as moving in a direction that we're passionate about, number one, I think it just makes all the difference in the world when it comes to, being in practice and then being able to kind of move out into other areas. I'm curious, your name, Rebelmente, what's the meaning behind that?
Well, I made it up. It's it's very fitting for me because I'm Puerto Rican, but I really can't speak Spanish. So Spanglish gets me by. And I think that in a lot of these different change points for me professionally, there were just a lot of times where I doubted myself and I feel like the outside world doubted me. And so there were times where I was really motivated by like just trying to prove myself to other people, prove myself to myself. And so there was a way in which like that felt very rebellious, I'm going to do these things the way that I want to do them. I'm going to have a group practice the way that I want to do it. I'm not going to wait for someone to give me permission to train other people. I think that I have a lot of training and expertise in this area. And so I'm going to take that and I'm going to make something of it. And so that's the rebellious side of it. And then in Spanish, mind is mente. So it's like rebellious mindset. And the idea to just like not stop learning and not settle for, things having to look or be a certain way. And my hope is that really can come through for people that are either my clients or just people who know me in life, like that mindset is a way of inspiring other people.
Yes. I love that. That's such a brilliant branding
Thanks.
to
Took a
come
while.
up with. Yeah. I've been working with another colleague about some branding, and it's I'm reminded of it, not to go too far on a tangent, but just thinking about brands like Starbucks or Target, the name doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what they do, but it's instantly recognizable.
Yes, that's what's actually the branding team that I worked with said the same thing to me. Definitely use Starbucks as an example. But yeah, I agree. And the skulls, there's a DBT skill. So for anyone who knows, DBT is very skills based. And there's this one skill called alternate rebellion. And alternate rebellion is like, if your behavior is something that you do and there's a way in which it serves the function of like rebelling against authority, but you need to find a way to do that in a way that's safe and legal. So it's like, what are these subtle ways that you can give this message, to whoever? And so my way of that, when I teach the skill, I tell people, like I'm professional and I'm a business owner, but I like wearing skulls. So I'll wear like skull socks, or I'll have like a professional scarf, but there's skulls in it. And so that's like my alternate rebellion practice. And so the Rebelmente logo is a skull with like flowers and plants growing out of it, which to me is like this rebellious way, like be who you are and really own that and be true to that. And then the plants coming out of it are like representing continuous growth. I just think there's like a lot of people in the fields of therapy and being therapists that like really don't take learning or continuing education seriously. Like they, and I'm sure for a lot of good reasons. I mean, we do really hard work and it's easy to get burnt out. And I think like when it comes to doing continuing education, it's easy to just check off the box. But I think like not only to be better clinicians, but also to protect ourselves from burnout, we have to keep learning, because if we get to this place where we're just kind of stagnant and think, okay, this is it, I've arrived and I'm just going to check off my CEs for the rest of my life, it just is really a disservice, I think, to yourself because it's not very fulfilling. And yeah, so I could go on a lot about that, but there's a lot of meaning in all of those different pieces.
Yes. That's just fascinating to me. And thanks for sharing that, because I think it really kind of gets to what's underneath for you is the why as to why you're pursuing this. Of doing the training. So what was the point at which you really kind of thought, I should do this?
It's a good question. I don't know that I always have these ideas when somebody asks me these questions and I look back in my Rolodex of thoughts, I'm like, did I have this in my vision? Did I think I would be eventually doing this? I know that there was a part of me when I became trained in DBT that really just I love going to a training that's a really good one and then leaving and feeling super energized. Like, okay, I'm ready to go back to work. Wait till I see these clients. I've got all these new things that I'm going to try. And so I remember being in my training. This was in 2013. I was like, I want to become one of these trainers. So I do remember that moment. I don't know that I ever imagined it becoming like a whole separate thing, but during the pandemic, I just started getting more and more requests for it. Can you come do a training for my staff in risk? Can you come do a training for my staff in, managing self-harm or introducing to DBT or things like that? And then people started asking me what my website was. And I was like, oh, just let me on Facebook or something. And so that was when I realized it needed to become an entirely separate thing. And, I'm glad I did because it branched out into other projects that I didn't really know. I am starting to speak more at conferences or trainings and things like that. And so I know that that's always been a big goal of mine, like to find a way to work and travel at the same time.
Right.
So I didn't know it was going to look like this, but I think there were parts of me that kind of always had like its hands in this later plan of life.
Yes. And it's always, again, fascinating how that tends to happen. And that in many ways, your idea was validated before you even got started with it, which is always a huge plus of really recognizing, okay, this is something I enjoy. This is something that I'm passionate about. And you just simply start sharing it. Yeah, it definitely has been validated in ways that I didn't expect. I just finished hosting an advanced DBT training for the first time with a partner. And we kind of just were looking at like, what are the gaps? Like, what are the questions that we keep getting about DBT? What are the places that we find teams generally need the most supervision in? And then we made a whole training based on that. And, I think it's hard for anyone who does like a widely recognized type of therapy. If you're going to go step out and say, hey, I'm doing an advanced training in this, like there's a part of that that's really scary because there's this huge audience of people out there who's like, well, what are you going to teach me? And so we just finished it up like a week or two ago. And it was a group of 17 people. And reading the comments after was just like everything that I needed to like reinforce me and give me so much more for doing this. And so I do find that the more I put myself in the space to open myself up to these opportunities, that validation comes back like 10 times fold for sure. Yeah. And that's that really what you speak to there is really just kind of, I don't know if this is a good way to put it or not, but really kind of smacks the face of impostor syndrome of just putting yourself out there and recognizing that, yes, you do have something to contribute. And yes, in what you teach might be something new for people that you might have assumed already knew it all.
Yeah, that's very hard. And it is true. I was talking about that. I mean, I feel like I talk about imposter syndrome a lot with other people that are in the same profession. I think, I don't know what it is about therapists. Like maybe we're like pensive to a fault sometimes, but we start to question, like, should I be giving people, should I be talking people through these things, or I have my own struggles, and am I being authentic if I'm encouraging everyone to go, speak their truth or fight for what they're looking for. And I'm struggling to do that myself. But I do think that there's a lot to be said when you put action behind that. And so, there is a part of me, the training stuff, starting a podcast or signing up to be on them. There's a part of me that does that simply to fight that voice, like
right.
to give myself evidence of, okay, you felt that way, but you still did it.
Yes. That's great. That's great. So if somebody were out there that's listening, were thinking of doing something similar, what advice would you give them?
I think in short, my advice would be just go do it. I think that, challenges show up differently for people. And there are some people who might just look at something and not even give it the time of day in terms of a thought or a dream that they have or a goal that they might accomplish. For myself, I try to use that. And I think there's a lot of pros and cons to it, but I try to use that as like fuel to move forward. So if I have a thought that says, maybe you should open up your own practice, as soon as that doubt starts to settle in, I try as much as possible not to give that much space. So, I might think to myself, well, are people really, I remember when I first went out into private practice and I left my community agency job, it was like, nobody's going to pay you money for a session. Like, and if they are, it's not going to be that much. And I remember like making a conscious decision to like go against that and just acting very opposite to that fear. And if I didn't see things in that way, like I do a lot of things still afraid or with a lot of anxiety, but I do them because I kind of had made that agreement with myself. And so I wouldn't be in the position that I am today with the businesses that I do have and the things that I have become involved with. I think there are cons to that too, because I bite off more than I feel like I really want to chew sometimes. And my husband's like, why did you sign up to do this? And so I think now it's no longer about proving it to other people. It's less about proving it to myself, but I do have to make intentional decisions around where I want to put my energy before, just going for something because it's going to feel good for me. But I think for anybody else listening, it's really easy to think like, why would anybody X, Y, or Z? Why would anyone pay me? Why would anyone listen to me? Why would anyone come to my training? And you really just have to put a lot of effort into looking for the arguments that are on the other side of that too. Like, why wouldn't they, why wouldn't they listen? Why wouldn't they pay? Why wouldn't they come? And so I think looking at it in that way has been really helpful. Yes.
And really, one of the things that I am reminded of is that a lot of times for us as therapists, some of our best work is when we're working with other people that are struggling with something we might be struggling with ourselves. And so I hear in this just kind of, the mindfulness and some of the DBT kinds of things in your own self-talk kind of thing around that. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, I think DBT is a really great fit for myself personally, because what's rooted in the therapy is like practicing what you preach and being vulnerable about that. And so there are ways it just comes a lot more organically to me because I teach other people things that I also do for myself.
Sure. So to change gears a little bit, you've got a new podcast, and as we're recording this, it came out today. You said, yes.
Yeah.
So
I didn't realize that when we planned it, but yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I started a podcast. It's called Tea Talk. And the tea, initially, my thought was it would be all things therapy related. But then I thought, of this saying that goes around of like sharing the tea. And so I thought a therapist doing a podcast that kind of comes back to all things healing related and not having to be just in the space of therapy, because there are plenty of things that are healing that are not in the realms of therapy or in a therapy room. And so I wanted to share stories and interview other people that are in those places and spaces, some therapists, some not, and hear about other ways that people have found healing or may find healing. And the tone is really conversational, just like if two people were sitting down and having a cup of tea. And so, yeah, I'm really proud of it. I thought it up, like, again, it was something that was kind of in my mind, but I got going pretty quickly, I'd say like impulsively. I pulled the trigger and I got it going, and then it was way more work than I realized, but it's here and it's been super reinforcing. The guests have been really, really great. And I just feel really lucky to be able to get to do it and talk to other people.
Yes. Congratulations on getting that launched. It's
Thank you.
You're right. It is a lot of work. I know I launched a new podcast this year, and I had kind of forgotten all that it takes on the front end to get a new one new one going. So yeah, so that's the podcast is the Kindness and Compassion podcast. So
Nice.
so we'll have to make sure people know about those two new podcasts. So
Yeah. Awesome.
So I want to be respectful of your time, Shaelene. What are some maybe some parting thoughts you have about that you would want to share with other therapists that are starting new ventures and doing kind of getting outside the typical one-to-one therapy room?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a couple of thoughts. Trying to get out of traditional therapy, I think it's really important it's very dialectical. So like on the one hand, there's truth around, we need to get training, and evidence-based practices are really important. We have data to show why they work. And at the same time, when we get overly focused on the rules of what that therapy looks like we lose the essence of therapy in itself. Yes. And so I think it's really important for therapists to be remembering that the therapy relationship is human to human. And so even though there are times where we have all of our data and we have our protocols and our trainings and all of these things that we kind of want to put on the client or bring the client into, we also have to remember that it's a human in front of us, and that humans don't always fit into a checkbox. And just because they don't fit into whatever your protocol or offering is, doesn't mean that they are broken or that you are a terrible therapist. It just means that, life is hard and we're all just here trying to figure it out. So definitely not getting too stuck on one side is really important.
Yes, you're exactly right. And I know in some of the supervision I do with other therapists, that's one of the things that I have to constantly remind them of is that relationship with the client is the most efficacious part of therapy. Is if you don't have that rapport with a client and aren't connecting on a genuine level, it's got whatever technique or method you use is just not going to be as effective.
100%.
Yeah. Love that. So Shaelene, tell folks how they can get in touch with you and how they can find your podcast and all of that sort of thing.
Sure. So the T-Talk podcast is available on all the platforms. You can search T-Talk or T-Talk with Shaelene, and you should be able to find it on Apple, Spotify, and all of the other places. I am on social media as Shaelene Kite, and you can find me professionally at Rebelmente on Instagram right now, not really anywhere else. And I do send out free weekly tips for DBT teachings. And I, share about my trainings that are coming up and have some coaching resources for group practice owners. And all of that is through my email list. So that's probably the best place to catch what's going on with me.
Awesome. And we'll be sure and have links in the show notes and the show summary for all this stuff. And so what's the next big event for you?
The next big event for me, now that the podcast is done, well, I'm going through DBT program certification, which is incredibly difficult. So that's like a big bear that I'm currently tackling. And then and I'm imagining that'll go on for quite some time. But I'm also going to be speaking at the Foundations of Connection Summit in Hawaii in August. One of Ernesto's offerings. I'll be speaking about yoga and clinical practice. So yes, that's an exciting one.
Yeah. I'm hopeful that maybe I could sneak away for that one. That would be awesome to go to Hawaii.
That'd be the one to sneak away for.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly anything that Ernesto does. Quick shout out to Ernesto. Anything that Ernesto does is top notch. And so,
I know.
As I was sharing with Shaelene before we started recording, got to spend some time with Ernesto at the Faith and Practice Conference in Jekyll Island this past a couple of weeks ago. So, well, Shaelene, thanks again for being on the podcast. And again, folks, be sure and reach out to Shaelene, the rebelmente.com. Is that correct? Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yes.
Yep.
And so be sure and check it out. And again, we'll have links here in the show notes and the show summary.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Well, again, a big thanks to Shaelene for joining me on this episode. And I absolutely love the name that she's got, Rebelmente. That just, as she explained kind of the meaning behind that, is so fitting for her and getting to know her in the tiny bit I got to know her just through this interview. And be sure and check out her resources there at rebelmente.com. And also be sure and check out her podcast, Tea Talk with Shaelene. And you can find it wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And I'm looking forward to jumping into that one because I think it's going to be a really good one. And again, big thanks to Shaelene for joining me in this particular episode. Also, be sure, and as I mentioned at the beginning, be sure to take some time just to do that quick little survey for me. That will help me know how to better serve you through this podcast and through the practice of therapy. And you can find that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/survey and get to that pretty quickly. It's just a really short, and I promise it's short, Google form survey that you can take, and that will just let me know what you're needing and where you feel like you need the most help. Also, as always, be sure and check out the resources at Practice of Therapy. I'd love for you to see what we've got there already, and check out the free webinars, practiceoftherapy.com/webinars. And again, can't do this kind of stuff without our sponsors, our sponsor TherapyNotes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And be sure and use the coupon code or the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can get 2 months of their services for free. So just to check them out. And I've been hearing a lot more about TherapyNotes, and that they're doing a lot of great stuff. I know they've come out with a lot of new features. One in particular that came out here this past week is a way for clients to make payment through their portal. And again, just a great feature to have with them. And they also had, as I mentioned, they had that Rachel mentioned in our little blurb about them, is that they have a telehealth portal. And I've been using it more regularly in my own practice, and it's worked pretty flawlessly. So anyway, be sure and check them out, practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. So that's it for this episode. Do take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, and leave us a review. We love getting feedback from people, and it just helps other people find the podcast. So take care, folks, and I look forward to joining you in future episodes. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.